Good morning. Hi, I'm Madonna Guy, and this is David Sheil, and we're here for the Natural Alternative podcast. So today we're going to talk about throwing the baby out with the bathwater and what it means within our industry, what's going on around the world, just a bit of a chat about, what it means psychologically. So, David.
Morning, everyone. We're looking at the concept of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In psychology, what we're talking about is sometimes like we can look at groups and things happening in the world, but this happens in personal relationships more than anywhere. And so and it's a type of thing that happens when we just say we have a conflict with somebody and or somebody does something bad to us, right? And then we get obviously upset, depending on how bad it is. Like some things are really bad and they might end up with symptoms like post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, but even if we get manipulated or betrayed or something, you can end up very resentful towards that person. And especially that's like initially, and in time that might fade or it might get more intense depending on the situation. But a lot of the times with what's happening in that situation is because when I've been hurt either by an institution or an individual or even a family system. And what happens is you can become very resentful, right? And during that period of time when you're feeling that, it's very hard to see any of the good in the person, say. And so they become just all bad. And so when you're doing that, you're not making a really valued judgment. Do you know what I mean? You're making a biased judgment and you're leaving out some of the parts. And being in holistic therapy, what we want to try to do is see the whole in as many cases as possible. So when when I was younger, I used to be a very reactionary towards that, but maturing and getting a more deeper understanding of how psychology works, it doesn't even feel good to be like that, because you end up with negative thinking, stuff on your mind, and and even though you're doing it to try to find in that mode, you're trying to find a solution or something you could say. Often, if they have more power than you, or there's a group of people, there's nothing you can do anyway. And as long as you hold on to that, as long as when I've held on to that view, it's like I'm not seeing the whole person, because that person, whoever they are, unless they're a serious antisocial personality type, like they have a disorder, like because about between 5 and 10% of the population have things like narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder,
5 to
or
10%.
some of them.
That's quite a
Yeah,
lot.
when you add them up, depending on the statistics and the Western, the country, you'll end up with between 1 and 2% of people having narcissistic, and the other, like antisocial personality, which used to be called a psychopath, they might be 1 or 2% too. And then you have very intense disorders like borderline personality disorder, and they're not like evil as such, but they're highly dysregulated people who can cause a lot of intensity. Same with people like ADHD, very emotionally dysregulated as adults. They can, develop intense problems if it's not dealt with addiction and also aggression. And so when you look at the population, we've got, between 7 and 10% with a very intense personality style, shall we call it. And part of those styles is there'll be not a good conscience, right? They'll be, they'll do things like blame others rather than take responsibility, or they might betray people. Do you know what I mean? It's like, because with the narcissistic style, they just want what they want. And then they'll manipulate, tell lies, leave parts out of the truth just to get that object. And that style, narcissistic style of behaviour, has been increasing statistically in society for some reason. So even though people aren't developing the full personality disorder, there's more of those styles of dissociative or feelingless, less empathetic behaviour. And but what I see as a point happening in the world is in personal relationships like marriage, say, and in also groups, there's or relationships, not marriage, there's a polarization in groups that happens where people are, like you can see it in society. I remember studying it and looking at the polarization levels where different groups of people are really intensely against each other to the point where they used to be able to empathize with the other side, but can't really go there at all. And since COVID, that got worse because you had family members crossed with this line. One person thought this was right, the other person thought that was right. So you ended up with schisms in families that wouldn't
And the
be normally.
government and media pushed, actually keeping family members apart if they weren't following the rules. So there was a $1 trillion spent on advertising to force this disconnect with family members.
Right. Well, that's the outcome. But what's happening before that, in the way I look at things, is that the polarization was already there, and somebody took advantage of it.
Yeah.
Right. And so, because this is how manipulation works, the polarization is already there. So the groups were, in that case, it would have been it was a safety issue, right? And it turned out that the thing that was saying was absolutely safe turned out to be less safe, and and looks like harmful after it all comes out of the wash. And some people might have been earlier on that, but still, the same nature of, if that was the case of an individual or a family system, you have the people who just say, because you've got the individual level, the resentment, but it goes up a level when it comes to in family therapy, when in dysregulated families, these things called family roles develop, and the primary family role is the scapegoat, right? First to emerge, and a golden child. And so you see one kid gets all the attention and energy because the parents need, for their own self-esteem, to have someone successful, then they can say they're doing all right. But really, they're just like really intense and fighting, and not, they'll have different. But then you'll have the older child and the scapegoat. The parents piles all of their activity onto them.
Can you hear that clicking? I wonder what it could be. Maybe it's my speaker. Maybe it was my speaker. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? I can't hear you. Okay, I need to have the speaker up, but I think the speaker might be making noise.
Oh,
so I think that's it. Okay, I'm not sure what to do there. No, it was quite bad. I just couldn't hear any words coming out of your mouth for like 10 seconds.
Oh, really?
Oh. So the first two, the first two personalities that come out are the scapegoat and the golden child.
Well, the usual, because that's the most obvious.
That's shocking. No, I can't hear you. That's fucked.
Oh, really?
Can you? So if this is off and you're can you talk?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So there's no noise unless I have that on. But when it's on, then I can't. The clicking is horrible. That's never happened before. What about now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
No, can't hear me.
Yep.
Okay, so I can't turn that one off either. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. I can't hear any clicking though.
Well, it's not happening now. Okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
So continue your thought.
Where were we?
Scapegoat and golden child.
Right. Okay, so so roles happen particularly in dysregulated family systems, either with intense arguing and maybe aggression, but also with narcissistic family systems, and often in addictive family systems. Not quite, up to speed on the attachment process, and so they're called, and so scapegoat is usually called the identified patient, because the scapegoat is the one who actually knows all the secrets of the family, and if people are being mean, they're going to cop it. So they have the most information. And generally the scapegoat's considered like, everybody likes the scapegoat because it means the aggressive members of the family aren't going to target them because they know they'll always get the scapegoat. So everybody's free of the type of whatever thing goes on in their family that's unhealthy. Not completely, but they get to witness one person being like hit all the time. You see it in some movies, that kid that always gets hit with the ball. It's like, and it's a little bit like that. And in some families, it's really bad. And so one person is, but when it comes to the family system in therapy, working with the scapegoat is the most likely chance of fixing the whole family system, they say in the theory, because the other people aren't willing to change because they have power, whereas the scapegoat's the person, they've got most understanding of what goes on because they've been a target of it most often. And so in the family system theory, they say Murray Bowen is the theorist who came in. He said that what happens in family systems also happens in social systems in society. And a tragedy is that in counseling psychology, whenever we learn something new, like we say we get a list of what scapegoating behaviors are, some people look at them and going, oh, look, I've got all these new techniques.
Yeah.
And that's, and that's in like that movie, A Clockwork Orange, Stanley Kubrick's movie.
Oh, it's on my list of things to watch. We haven't got there yet. I'll have to put it on my list.
Well, in that movie, the main character goes to jail, right? And he starts reading the Bible. And he's reading the Bible, he starts getting all these privileges because he's becoming a Christian. But what was actually going on in his mind, he was imagined being one of the Romans who was torturing Jesus. He was reading the Bible because he was getting into being one of the Romans, and he'd had these visions of being in the best fashion of the day in his Roman uniform, going out with power. Nobody talks back to him. And so he's reading the Bible, but he's getting into the narrative of the Roman guy, because the guy in the movie is a psychopath or someone with antisocial personality disorder, they say now. And all the discoveries that we make in psychology like that, they become a list of things, but they also become a list of manipulative tools that anyone can use invisibly, because in the family systems that dysregulate, the people learn that out of necessity as kids, to manipulate and lie and cheat to get their needs met. But when they convert into adult life, it's not a very good way of doing things.
Right.
And so this style of manipulation can be born in the family system, either, and in the case of people who use the tools and the people who are victim of the tools, you see that in abusive families. And then but at the same time, these things get used in business, say, because it's a way to control people and manipulate them. And so the more that the psychology discovers, the more that there's like, techniques, invisible techniques, because the point of these things is they're invisible, they're manipulative.
Yeah.
And so that's why the scapegoat nearly impossibly finds any justice, because everybody's blind.
You've heard where the term scapegoat originally came from?
Yes. Definitely, in the Bible.
It was an ancient ritual in which a goat was symbolically burdened with the sins of a community and sent out into the wilderness. So I suppose if you've got your little kids at home who are the scapegoat and they're going out there into, the community with that damage that's been, popped onto the family, that's going to then spread out into the little community everywhere they're going.
And that's exactly how they worked it out in psychology.
Yeah.
Because that pattern, because if you look, what's being described there is a pattern behavior that goes on in society all the time. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's almost inherent in dysregulated family systems. It's inherent to have the family roles, because there are only two of the family roles. You've got heaps of them. You've got scapegoat, you've got golden child, you've got the carer, you've got the invisible child. And there's a lot of them, because the more dysregulated the families, the more intense the roles come out for people to feel. Because what usually happens is it's nearly always not insecure attachment in attachment theory. So instead of the normal dysregulation followed by comforting, followed by explanation, there's someone's in trouble, they're yelled at, someone defends them, everyone, and then it becomes this, and then everyone's just silent for days. It's like, and then it's this thing that goes on, and it's a whole atmosphere. And so it's a nice thing. It's a nice thing to learn about, and there's a lot of information available online, and you can look it up.
Yeah.
But so the way it, and that transfers into organizations in the same way. And so you'll have, in a market, you'll have a dominating market sector, maybe scapegoating a minority market sector. And so that's, and so in family systems, it's called abuse, and in the corporate system, it's called business.
Yes.
And but the problem is that you can see, like for example, I was working in photography materials when the digital imaging came about. And what happened was, so the competition was forming this new tech, digital imaging, and working in the industry, all of the old, and because computers came up, all of the old industries just died. These are like companies that have been there for 100 years, all went broke in terms of brushes, in terms of photographic materials. They just all got cut off because the market sector developed a new product that made everything redundant.
Yes.
And it was a big collapse, like with, and then you lose all of these traditional styles of handmade things, right? Which you can go, and because all the photographic chemical companies and paper, they're all going broke as well. And no one knew what to do, and they all kind of went broke. And the ones that, like Kodak, took up imaging, and so they kept up. And then you see now digital photography is kind of better anyway, but all of those old styles were lost. And then what happens is now you can still get the old stuff now because they recalibrated. Oh yeah, so sorry about that break. Yeah, so we were talking about how industries, I'll give you a little blurb. Says, so these techniques we're talking about, scapegoating, these techniques can be used in various contexts, including family dynamics, workplace situations, and even group dynamics. Understanding these techniques can help you identify them in your own life and take steps to protect yourself. And so with things like scapegoating, self-awareness is really important because they not only happen in individual relationships, family dynamics, relationship dynamics, and business. So in business, we have to learn the same thing. Like if we belong to a small minority sector, like I belong to a small, as a holistic counsellor, I'm a very small group, belong to a smaller group of people from the normal counselling and the psychologist community. So it's like you're in a small minority and you're doing something specialist, and you kind of go to places that they don't go to. Like, for example, because in holistic therapy, you're always going to include a spiritual thing if people need it.
Right.
Because that's just part of the holistic system to work on the whole person. It's because we want to work on the body, the mind, the heart, the feelings, and the soul. Or if people don't have a soul or don't, or if they,
there's always those narcissists.
Yeah, no, but if people don't include that, because some people are atheists, so you look at their belief system. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Because when you're doing grief work, you need to deal with
the terminology that they use.
Yeah, because with serious trauma and you're dealing with death, and so therefore you have to have some grieving methods that's their highest resolution of perception, and so with grief, with things like a nice thing I like to ask people: do you believe that the sacrifices you made will manifest as a positive in the future? Because that sort of thing can be helpful for some people, and but anyway, so it's just a very system, and that's like the difference between holistic medical practitioners. They're taking a very holistic thing, including those things, but the mainstream doesn't, the same as in counselling and psychology. Generally, it's a more limited or what do you call it when you take a herb and you extract the thing out in the scientific process and just take the active ingredient? So there's a lot more of that style of thing on every level. It's you're taking the active ingredient out of the herb and then mass manufacturing that. So you don't have the whole thing. You've got a
like
limited thing.
aspirin is from willow bark.
Right, and in some cases that's good. So the reason that you'll do that is to make the product cheaper, which is a benefit to people, and that's often the main benefit. It'll be cheaper, or you'll take something with some of the side effects that people react to in a standard way.
And the
And just
problem is that, for example, that aspirin willow bark, the problem is that when you're taking it as a whole herb, there are nearly always components in the whole herb that counterbalance the side effect when you synthesize it and make it an individual molecule. So
sure.
yes, it's a very simple molecule and it does what it does. But from a naturopathic perspective, obviously, I get people who bleed too much, who bruise too much, who get, bleeding eyeballs, so the side effects. Whereas if you gave them willow bark, that would not happen.
Well,
so with the Flexner, thinking about scapegoats back in 1910, when the Rockefeller, they took over the medical system, there was a report put out called the Flexner Report in 1910.
I don't know that.
Yep. So in 1910, there was a Flexner report released. And basically in that report, which was funded by the Carnegie Foundation, they basically and Rockefeller's financial backing, they basically looked at universities in America and restructured it so that it had to be pharmaceutical medicine, so synthetic patented drugs rather than herbs and homeopathics. So 75% of universities in America were affected. And it was the natural stuff that got scapegoated, to be taken over by surgery and pharmaceutical drugs. So it was, and it actually created the terminology for being a quack back then, so that any doctors who were still using natural herbs and homeopaths were called quacks. So that's where the quack came from as well, the Flexner report and the ongoing thing within that. So, I've only been doing it 30 years, but the industry has been being scapegoated since 1910. At the very least, it's been going on for 115 years.
Well, the same sort of thing happens in the psychology. Like when you look at the history of how things are founded, and you look at what they used to do in mental hospitals, it's pretty seriously grotesque what they used to do. And
Yes.
And so there's been a lot of improvements, as well as a lot of things have been let go. And it's a similar sort of thing in like a lot of counsellors talk about the most popular counselling method preferred by the more medical styles of people is CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy. And nobody argues about its effectiveness, except a lot of counsellors see it as like a band-aid technique, because it gets very good short-term results, but over the long term, you mightn't be able to get into the deep part that is really you're working with like a client. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. Just say if I get a client that comes in and they're really upset and emotional and they're having problems with their wife and maybe or husband or at work, it's like immediately you can work out you work out where they're misconstruing something, because often people who are damaged, they'll misconstrue, they'll miss a point that they're leaving out, and you can make corrections like that with CBT, like because it was all about CBT it's a combination of techniques, but it's basically it's almost holistic because it takes into account behavior, thinking and feeling, but it doesn't, the higher level we're talking about before, like the spiritual or the intuitive, it kind of leaves that out. And in the deeper type of therapies, which are family system therapy, you're getting into those deep patterns that were created when you were a child. CBT has the foundation of that, but there's a lot of deeper approaches where you have to look at the whole family system and how someone's working in their life within those relationships. Say if they come from a more dysregulated, that they might have been, like before they got married and before they got a job, they'd been scapegoated their whole life.
Yeah.
And so they go into when they're growing up, so they naturally get it in their marriage and their workplace because that's what they've been used to the whole time.
Yeah.
And often the golden child is the champion. They get support by both parents. They're a legend, and they go out being a legend. So you end up with these funny families that have like a hero and a loser, right?
Yeah.
And it's and all the other people support the hero thing because they know if you don't support that, you'll get smacked down. And so you'd rather, for the sake of harmony, the one person, the goat, does all the suffering, and all the lions and everything. They're like just happy that somebody's carrying all that burden, as
Yeah.
the Bible says.
Yeah. Well, I don't know whether I'm sure you haven't, but there were a couple of bits on Dr. Phil in the last week where he's been talking to different generations, throwing away, just thinking about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. People just throwing away parents and grandparents and just refusing to connect and having 6, 12, 18 months off and then coming back into the relationship. And of course, they're still not talking about what the real issue is, or if the real issue is there, then they're not recognizing what the real issue, and then they're getting into fights about other things. And it's apparently the disconnect from family is the biggest it's ever been in the States at the moment. So again, this, whether it's the political divide, whether or not it's the health divide, whether or not it's, whatever it is, it's worse at the moment in the States.
So
that's where Dr. Phil is.
no, but that's so generally the studies will be mostly on the Western countries, but that's secure attached, which is what people getting on is, because it means interdependent,
Right.
not cut off in someone's boundary,
Yes.
not getting into there. And so it's like that secure attachment's been declining, and narcissistic behaviors which have been increasing, which means I'm only going to look after myself and not the group.
Right.
And what do you say Dr. Phil started with?
Basically that, so he had a mother and daughter on there, and they had had a really fractious relationship for a long time. And the daughter particularly felt like the mother just did not support her in her decisions, in her thoughts, in her choices. And the mother was choosing to really try to be supportive and see the grandkids and things, but the daughter just kept cutting her off. And the way that they both told it was that neither of them understand the other one. So there was a real disconnect with communication.
Well, and that's where it usually starts. It usually starts from people not listening.
Yeah.
Like, for example, the scapegoat, no one's going to listen to them because then they have to face their own being. Because when you can blame somebody else, it's really easy because you don't have to do as much self-reflection, which is why people in those systems, they become very superficially orientated because you're hiding what happens at home. It's all about appearance all the time.
Yeah.
You got to appear to be whatever society wants more about it. And so they find it hard to admit a fault, whereas a lot of people will be like, oh, I've got these things wrong with me, but I've got all these good stuff. And that's what's actually balanced. Like the point about looking the baby out with the bathwater is that when you think about when you're bathing the baby, right? The reason you're bathing the baby is because they've got pee all over them, crap, dribble, everything that they crawled on in the day, inside and outside, and you want to wash that filth off, right?
Yeah.
Except what it means is throwing the baby out, you're just seeing the filth, and you're not looking at the innocent part, which is clean. And the only reason it's not clean is because as a parent, I hadn't done that yet. That's actually my role, to actually take away the dirty bit, appreciate the innocent bit. And because everybody, even though people get dirty, like say, the way I look at this sort of stuff, when people become corrupted by their family system or corrupted by a political system or corrupted by a social system into a way of thinking that does what you say, doesn't take care of. It's like when I said earlier, when you're resentful, you don't see the innocent part of another person anymore. You just see the dirty part.
Yeah.
Right? Because just like because there's this saying that says like we go out every day and get filthy and
right.
worse. Do you know what I mean? We get messed up by people and we come home really dirty, and our family kind of helps us clean up and we help them clean up with all the crap that got put on us dealing with these issues at work, and home's your safe space. And so and so we do get dirty, like we get psychologically dirty. These attitudes that you're talking about, and those attitudes they become social norms. And
Yeah.
when everyone does them, they just say it's okay, even though it's hurtful or annoying or something. It's like, so some things that are in men's groups or in feminist groups are playing out just unfair. There's no listening. Do you know what I mean? Because the
Yeah.
groups have a resentment in them where they can't get to the innocent side of the other side, right? And you see it most with that. You've got, because feminism's well ahead, because they've been re-educating girls and women for, like 70 years now, but men are
Yeah.
just starting.
Yeah,
And
since the
so
1940s.
yeah, and so, so guys are starting, but the problem is when you get absorbed in those think groups that are only your own people, they're like echo chambers, you can't see the goodness in the other side anymore. So you end up with groups of only those people, and I won't pick a side, and they're just bringing up all the negative stuff. Like, for example, when I was reading Australian government articles while I was studying about it, and they said the problem is a lot of the statistics come out of the severe places,
Yeah.
whereas in the norm, it's not really severe like that. Like, most people are just trying to get on. And then
Yeah.
you've got this, like I said earlier, this small percentage that are more severe, and they're not trying to get on. But those small percentage of people with the stronger personality types have a strong effect in society.
Yeah.
Because just like in couples counselling, they say, like, Don and Julie Gottman, they worked out that for every negative
Are they the
interaction
Four Horsemen people?
yeah, and they did this study, and they worked out for every negative thing you do in a relationship, like couple relationship, but it's the same with kid relationship, and the same with group relationship. For every negative, you need 5 positives to make the relationship work. And
Yeah.
that's because negatives are always stronger. Like, a negative is going to be yelling, or a negative is going to be a angry behavior. A negative is going to be something manipulative,
Well,
right?
that's why the criticism's been so interesting, and I've got a few
Criticism.
people really close to me who do this, where instead of, like, just say I say, hey, I like what Musk did about blah blah blah. Well, rather than discussing the actual thing that he did, they pick on Musk about being a billionaire, or about going to Mars, or about, they'll pick on some, or the fact that he's autistic, or, they'll pick on some personal thing about him rather than actually discuss the thing. So it's this personality based argumentation that goes on around the place. It's like our last election. The people who I knew didn't vote for Dutton. They said, well, how can you trust someone who looks like a potato head? And you're going, this is not personality voting. We need to be looking at what is going on in the country and what's going to be best moving forward. But personality is what the media pushes as well.
No,
So
people are like that too. People decide whether they like something or don't, someone or not, intuitively most of the time. And they haven't even thought about it. They
yeah.
just, I don't like that guy, or I don't like that chick. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's pretty normal.
Yeah,
And
but
so,
we're not taught to think critically at school these days. Kids are, like, I listen to little Teddy coming home from school and he says things and I think, oh my God, he'll grow out of believing that, hopefully, but he probably won't. If it's in the curriculum in grade 2, it will probably still be there in grade 12. So I've got another 10 years of saying, oh, that might not be quite true, sweetie. So it's going to be very interesting watching the indoctrination over the next dozen years.
no, but that indoctrination's been going forever. It's not a new thing.
Yeah,
The
no,
that
I know. Since the Rockefellers took over the
No,
schooling
but
system.
there's always been a method of that going on in society. It's called the superego. It's like, it's called the morality of the time in counselling, and it changes every 20 years. And even in the time, we think, oh, it's these people are bad. It's actually those positions are always there, just like in a dysregulated family system. There's always going to be, because you think about this, just even if you think 5% of society have got extremely intense personality problems, right? It doesn't matter where they end up, that's going to be the crappy spot, whichever side of the fence. Wherever you get a bunch of those people, it's going to be mean, especially if they get into the head positions. And so, and that's continual. And that 5%, like if you think about the Gottman thing, right? So just say you've got an organization, right, and it does something really negative, it's got to do 5 positives to make the relationship better. But when a corporation or a company is doing business and they're scapegoating a business sector so that they can get the whole market, which is normal practice in business, it's like the people in that sector, which are a smaller sector, they're going to be scapegoated because they do that. They're normal business techniques. So, scapegoating will be, oh, their products don't work.
Yeah.
Right?
There's another new one that was sent to me by 3 different people this morning where they're picking on B6 again. Sorry.
No, but it's
there's
not
doctors jumping up and down again, scapegoating vitamin B6 again, because it's not a form that our bodies can metabolize.
Right.
Yes, it's a synthetic form that's put in food and medications, and of course now they're saying stop all B vitamins, go get your blood test. I'm like, yeah, I don't stock things that have that crap B6 in it. But
right. Except the difficulty with bringing up individual cases like that is that it's like the type of if it's scapegoating and it's a type of business abuse, say, but because they've got power, it's all legally bound and it all gets tied up in this sort of stuff. It's the difficulty isn't the individual things, because just say, I'll give you an example, like with say narcissistic abuse, right? Especially something like covert narcissistic abuse, where nobody's hitting anyone, but there's a lot of lies, there's a lot of manipulation, double standards, there's like blaming the other side all the time. If you take up the individual cases, it doesn't work, because when you look at what's happened, it's been a series of covert things, betrayal and this that has happened over the scapegoat.
Lost you. It's happened over what?
A long period of time.
Right.
And often they're little things over time, right, that build up for the victim who's the scapegoat. And if you were talking about it in business, in a small market sector that a big sector's trying to take over, and to do that, and it's meant to be called monopoly, and there's meant to be in America they call it antitrust. And except if no one acts on the monopoly, the antitrust, all that happens is eventually the smaller segment gets rolled out, and then that disappears from society.
Yeah.
And that happens throughout. Like science has been doing this since its inception, and sometimes it gets it right, but sometimes it gets it really wrong. And so the mistake might last for 200 years before the technology comes up to work out, oh, I think we got that wrong, and now it's caused like all of that, right? But it's the same in the individual, in the family system, that it's the same type of stuff of invalidation, manipulation, blaming the other side, double standards, and the individual cases that people argue about, you just exhaust yourself, because it's just one of, it's like I call narcissistic abuse rolling thunder. Because if the victim goes to describe it, they're talking about years of stuff. They're talking about years of stuff where they've been ganged up on until their agency they don't even know anything anymore, because they're surrounded by their family system, who just keep everyone in this weird sort of thing. And it's this endless series of things,
Yeah.
And so it's very hard to go, this is what happened. And so just trying to describe it makes the scapegoat go nuts, trying to think it through all the time. What was that happened? And it wasn't any one thing. It was being in this role and being someone with more power, just constantly saying things that aren't true, blaming you for something they did. What do they call it? DAVO? Deny, accuse, reverse, victim, and offender.
Right.
And that system
I was thinking of the stages of the grief gauge, and I was at a business meeting this morning, and someone asked, whether I'd always work from home, and I said, no, I had big clinics, and they asked how successful they were, and I said, well, my expenses were between $300,000 and $600,000 a year, so I didn't make a lot of money for that 12 years because the expenses were so high. Anyway, and as I was talking about it, you often realize that you're not over some things, because it was the big meddlesome groups, regulatory groups in Australia, that were pushing all sorts of ideas behind the scenes that practitioners like me, who had health fund rebates for a decade, would no longer be allowed to have health fund rebates unless you went up to a master's.
Mm.
They said if you changed your address, you could never have health fund rebates for new addresses. So it would only be grandfathered to the address you had, which made me stay in the big clinics for longer because I had a team. So if I moved, they would lose their health fund rebates as well. So there was all this industry craziness that made my decisions be very unfair for a long time.
So
Because,
that's on me. Can I ask you one thing about that? So one thing I've just got up a little list here, like double standards. Was it true that some of the people who were getting Medicare rebates didn't have to follow those standards, and the naturopaths did? Did that happen too? Because all sorts of things, because all doctors get those. Did they get in trouble if they moved, or
well,
was it
no,
only?
because they were under the AMA, because they're connected to the AMA, TGA, and APRA. They're fine.
Oh, right, I see.
So
Medicare's not excluded. So Medicare's outside APRA. Oh, I suppose social workers get Medicare and they're not in APRA.
yeah, so I never got
In
Medicare, but
counselling.
I was registered with health funds in Australia for 25 years.
Oh, you
So
got
for
that.
25 years, if people came to see me for herbal medicine, naturopathy, kinesiology, remedial massage, they could get a health fund rebate from their health funds.
Right, and they
That
can't anymore.
disappeared. No, that disappeared on the 1st of April 2020.
Oh, is that what
2019.
disappeared? Oh, they took away your right to get healthcare rebate.
Yeah, yeah.
All
17 health
naturopaths?
funds. 17 health funds
All
disappeared.
naturopaths got that.
No, naturopathy was one of the 17. There was also reflexology. There was also, and reflexology was a 2-year course. There was also Bowen therapy. Bowen therapy was a 2-year course. There were 17 of them.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I remember when the updating of everyone had to have a degree. That was like in 2012.
Yeah, so I went back and spent another 20 grand to upgrade, and I only got 24 out of 26 of the subjects done because the last 2 subjects were so stupid I ended up refusing to do them.
Oh, and then they became invalidated anyway because
They
all
were
the people
invalidated anyway. There's absolutely no point. And I was never so grateful not to be registered.
Oh, that's quite incredible because some people in counselling are looking at the same types of things are happening there. That you have to get a master's to even not qualify, but before you can register. And it looks like the accreditation bodies are doing the same sort of messy stuff.
Yeah.
That with the medical stuff, they've got APRA and they're all unified, and that makes them very powerful to because all the big AMA, they're all in, and the psychologists associations all inside that, and so counsellors are a little bit outside.
Yeah,
and so there is some concern about that because they keep getting everyone to update their things. And it's the accreditation bodies that do it, and they're meant to be lobbying, but we'll see because they haven't got any, they haven't achieved any results.
Yeah.
Like the only people who get any Medicare funding are psychologists and social workers, but not counsellors. And I'm not upset about it. I'm just watching it because I've got friends who.
Well, you chose to do holistic counselling because it's such a really nice, beautiful way of looking at the human.
Yeah, but I've got a lot more experienced counsellor friends who've been, working in it for 30 years, and they're kind of interested in that understanding of what happened with the other holistic practitioners like naturopaths and all that type of thing.
And I've got friends who are acupuncturists and they had to close down shop over COVID because they were under APRA and APRA insisted on the GBT jabs. So because of that, I know people who have lost their entire careers because of it.
Right. Well, even
lots of people, including doctors.
But most of the counselling jobs are still. I haven't looked for a little while, but they were still, all their jobs were requiring up-to-date COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
Even well after it was mandated.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm not sure about that. I haven't looked for a little while. But I know some people without vaccination have been getting jobs. So
it can happen.
It can happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but so, and so you can see that scapegoating, and see the problem with scapegoating, if you analyze the idea of like the actual thing, what's happening with the baby, because a lot of us have been parents, it's like, if we don't clean the baby, it's sick, right? Yeah. Right, it'll get sick. So we need to clean the baby. But some people, something about the narcissism going up is that they've done studies and found people's disgust threshold are going up.
Right.
Right. And with that, you see a less likely of wanting to manage a baby, or like you said earlier, old people.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a funny thing that something with narcissism going up. I can't remember the psychologist who worked that out about disgust sensitivity going up. And disgust sensitivity goes up with an increase of narcissism too, ironically. And thinking back to our metaphor about the baby in the bathwater, it's like, oh, that's disgusting. See, it's like a limited, just looking at the negative, the baby's disgusting and dirty. But
Yeah.
I've got a responsibility to clean that baby.
Yeah.
Right. And after the baby's clean, what have we got? The innocent part.
Yeah.
And the same as in psychology, it's like when we become polarized, we just look at the whole thing and it's negative and we miss the innocent part.
Yeah.
So when we make an analysis of a person, say, like if I'm really, because in the past I've had some really, in not only business, but people do really awful things. And for a long time, also with things like schools, and you can end up so resentful about how something got managed that it's so furious and can last for so long that you can't see the good part in that organization or personal at all. And so part of counseling is to get back to the holistic perspective, which is seeing the whole person and not just the bad bit, because when we get hurt, it's very easy to just fall into the bad side of a person or a bad side of a thing. And so because I'm learning in myself how to work this out. And when I do that, when I start to see the good because I've had experiences even of 30 years ago where I reanalyzed them and I went, all right, I really didn't like that person, but actually I got some really good stuff out of that. Like I lived in an ashram for a year and the guy who was in charge was kind of a bit of a fruit loop and a bit aggressive. And so, I left and just thought that guy, and I just always said negative things. But then when I reassess it with this lens, I got a lot of really good stuff out of that, like 12 months. And, do you know what I mean? And if we can reassess holistically over our timeline, we can end up having fresher energy for our fight. Because you still want to fight the system, right? But you don't want the system to deplete you. Because when the other side has all the power, fighting just means they'll just keep like whipping another thing. And then everyone will keep it a secret, and then no one will act because it's like everyone's scared because they don't want the scapegoat to get who's the scapegoater.
And I suppose, yeah. And I suppose that's where, when they started talking about evidence-based medicine, in my field about 15, 20 years, whenever it was, I can't remember when it was, but all of a sudden where they started going into all these meta studies. And one of the things that happens within natural therapies is that there's not a lot of money for these scientific studies for a start. So pharmaceutical companies will deliberately pay for studies that are done badly so that there's a result that pushes their agenda, that is that they don't work. Because one of my clients used to work for one of the big companies in Australia who makes supplements. And even just to apply to the TGA to have a new product, even if you had a product and you change the label, that can cost you between $10,000 and $100,000 in Australia for a small company.
That's right. There's lots of academics who talk about the price of studies becoming so expensive that only large corporations can afford to do them.
Yes, but what ends up happening...
But it used to be at uni, people could do studies and they're fairly cheap to do. I mean, studies aren't a lot more complex than putting out questionnaires when trying something. But making it billions of dollars is kind of a little bit nutty. It's not rocket science. People because I've seen people doing studies online. There'll be organizations and they'll put out a questionnaire for a particular demographic. And that's, but that's because the proper studies, like I said, they've become so expensive that only universities can afford a few of them. Yeah. And then for it to be validated. And that's the problem. So it just means that it's become very selective.
Yeah. So one of my funny stories with the meta studies was that they did a study on fish oils, and basically they put together, I'm going to make up some numbers. So just say they put together 200 studies that encased 2,000 people or 20,000 people that had been on fish oils, and they were looking at the outcomes for heart health. So
Yeah.
basically what they did was used, because they basically put all the data into one meta study, but some of the studies were done so badly or with such a tiny amount of fish oils that it wasn't going to make it. So basically the result of this meta study was that it made no impact on health. When you actually pulled apart that meta study, because I've got a friend who's a scientist, and she says, oh, meta study, that's where it's at. And I said, and I gave her a few examples within my industry where it had been put together deliberately to say things don't work. When they actually looked at the fish oil studies where there was the therapeutic dose, they took before and after tests with the heart, they used oily fish as well in the diet. It showed that there was a marked improvement in heart health and a lower all-cause mortality. In other words, the whole health improved with good doses. So when you actually pulled apart the meta study and only used the good studies within there, the ones that were done correctly, then it showed a massive improvement with heart. And that's when the the Australian Heart Association removed the words oily. They said, we recommend one piece of fish per week, for your heart health. Before the study, which proved that oily fish were important for heart health, it had recommended 2 pieces of oily fish. It removed the word oily and went from 2 to 1, even though that's not what the study said.
All right. Well, let's go through what's actually happening there. So, because I know there's a lot of studies in counselling like that too. Like for example, so the person who's doing the study has a a conclusion of what they want to happen.
Yep, absolutely.
Right, and so and that could be influenced by money or by lobby or by this or that, and and so you end up with things that are not complete or like because another example you give, like some herbs, like some medicines, um, like some herbs that you use like for normal treatment, you give them for one thing, but they benefit a whole bunch of other things.
Yes.
Like a lot of herbal treatments are like that.
Yep.
Like you're taking it for one thing, but it has a much more holistic. It'll fix other things as well.
Definitely.
And I'll just give you a metaphoric example of that. Whereas if you synthesize the active ingredient, right, it can only do one thing.
Yeah.
Maybe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's a way of and
it will often mess with hormones and enzymes and all sorts of.
But also another like an important thing to remember about people is that so it's not very scientific when people because you want to try to disprove your theory in science. You're like trying to go see if it doesn't work actually more, and then if it does, do you know what I mean you've got a new theory that was a hypothesis before. So you want to try to argue against your idea as much as possible to see if it works against the flow.
Yeah.
And do you want to what do they call that in science? Whereas when you've got a foregone conclusion, you're going to make a decision the way you are anyway. And I'll give you a better example of that. So because I'm a vegetarian, right, I won't take fish oil at all.
Yes.
Right? And so because my preference starts with that, right, just hearing all about the fish oil, I'll just reject it because I'll go, what is it the fish oil's doing that I can get it's an omega thing often. Where are the best omegas? So I'll eat walnuts and I'll find out where those active things are, walnuts, and then you eat walnuts and you found, oh right, it's got the same sort of stuff. High omegas, good proteins, you know what I mean? But the point is that people often have a foregone conclusion because of their lifestyle or because of their preference. So that's in a personal one for me, right? If I'm in an industry where I go, I like what I am, right, which is maybe a doctor or maybe a naturopath, I'll support my own conclusion in the same way as that.
Right? Yeah, so absolutely.
Yeah. And you see, this is where the polarization happens. Problem is that the fish oil, it does produce health outcomes, but if you're a vegetarian, you go, oh, what are the active ingredients? Like, what's in that? Like, because there must be a veggie alternative. But do you see what I'm saying? Because I don't want to get caught up in this issue of vegetarianism.
Yeah. And then you just need to muscle test which ones are going to be best for you because, flax seeds and chia seeds and walnuts and hemp,
But
different people will cope with different ones, but a combination is always good.
But you see, that's a nice metaphor for how people will, just like with their lifestyle, they've already chosen, so therefore, just like with their career, they've already chosen, therefore.
So like my guy came in the first time I met him, which is about 4 sessions ago, and he said, I don't do exercise or water.
Right.
And then on the 4th session, I said to
That
him,
sounds like me. No, I do a bit of it.
and I said to him, oh, are you getting any exercise? And the second I said, he said, no, I don't do exercise. And I said, oh, that's right. Yeah. Because, but he's the one that, because he's on Ozempic, it's eating away his muscle mass and muscle quality. So we're, working in the background. So without exercise, how do you increase muscle without exercise? So we're actually using stem enhance. And when I was vegetarian for 20 years, one of the things that would show up regularly in my bioimpedance screening, well, even though I was about the right weight, I was sarcopenic obese. So I was skinny fat. So I had not enough muscle and too much fat. And stem enhance was one of the things that actually helped me gain my muscle mass. So for whatever reason, my stem cells just weren't kicking on in.
Oh, right, the stem enhance.
Well, because that's the thing that increased my muscle mass and muscle.
Well, as you get older, your production of stem cells decreases, right?
Yeah, from the time you're 15, we lose about 5% per year.
Same with things like nitric oxide; they just decrease as you get older.
Yeah, and I think even things like red light and PEMF, so the pulsed electromagnetic frequencies, but red light therapy, it actually helps release stem cell production and function.
I'm doing red light therapy this afternoon.
Woohoo! Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, so it's sort of nice to have those things in the home because there's lots of different options. There's lots of options these days of things to help you to deal with those things.
There so is, and everything's becoming more available. Isn't that ironic about the whole thing? Because of the internet, we've got so much more positive information available, yet still these same things keep happening. Like it's like the internet, the effect that it's having on people. Like not everyone, because some people aren't affected by it like the same way. But everyone's like, oh, it's killing the children, and it's kind of like, yeah, right. But just like you're saying that with the studies, the truth is the people who made the internet and all the things, they actually knew what it'd do.
Absolutely.
Studies have shown that.
Sure, they
studies
did.
have shown that. I'm just saying as a metaphor to keep out of our own personal territory of health and everything. Like with the internet, because in the count, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they knew the effect that it had. And they've been, they've been pulled up constant times because they're all owned by American companies and pulled into the Senate saying, did you know that this would mess people up? And they did. And they didn't do anything about it, which is just so, this is my point, is that this always happens in society. And as individuals, it's like, it's good to learn about what it is so that you don't become hit by it, because it's like everyone's saying that the kids are being ruined by the internet, but I'm like, well, there's a lot of good things too.
But they are being ruined by the internet. They are.
I know, but once again, talking about the holistic thing, if we analyze the internet, the baby, the innocent part, so they say that, but the kids can only do their schoolwork on the internet, right? It's all online. There's no paper anymore. They have to use. So when people say the internet's bad, I feel like slapping them, because actually the internet's where everybody does their job. Most people sit down in front of a computer all day long, and then they'll listen to...
And most people don't know that blue light affects their cognition, it affects their mood, it affects their sleep cycle, it has long-term risks for macular degeneration and eyesight disappearing way faster. It's addictive. It messes with your dopamine cycles. It gives you cognitive overload. It does a crap load of stuff that babies and kids' brains are not ready for.
Yeah, but once again,
as adults and parents, it's our responsibility to limit the stuff we can limit when we know that it is damaging their brains. We know it.
Well, you see,
everyone knows it.
Yeah, but you're missing the point of the story.
No, I'm not missing the point. I agree with you.
But that's like throwing the baby out the pot, because all I did was mention the positive side, and you go in.
Yeah, but people want to not change their lifestyle, so people are more happy to hear whatever, it's really good, rather than going, fuck, that might be the reason why my child has this, or this. So it might be why they're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I know Teddy is so addicted to that damn screen, he wakes himself up early and starts begging to be able to use a screen for hours before it's, so kids are addicted.
But I think that's not the real problem with the kids, right? It's like, yes, it is, sure, and they're too young to use it, but they keep bringing in regulations like next year, schools won't allow to have phones. So at school time, there'll be no phone. And so because we've been living with an unregulated internet for 20 years.
Yeah.
And so it's not for about 20 years that you can really measure the effects. And I did look at meta studies on this while I was at uni, and they found that it was turned out to be a lot more positive than the negative stuff. And the negative stuff for a small minority, because I'm on the internet all the time, and I'm like, and I'm not watching distracting things, and I'm like on information all the time, and I really like it, and I get a lot out of it. So I just see it as like really, really positive. And you have to teach the kids, this is the world they're going into. All the adults are on their screens all day and all night because I watch them, and they all say they're not, but they are. And even the people who made these internet things, they're addicted as well. They talk about it. They're just as vulnerable as everyone else, and everyone's addicted. And the adults want to say they're not, but they are. And then so the internet becomes a screen to go, oh, this is why my kids messed up, because they don't want to look at their own parenting. Sometimes that is really maybe the underlying problem with the kid being dysregulated. Because I agree it is limited. Like with our kids, they don't have their screens at night. They're not available. We keep them in our room. So when they're little, like our little boy, he gets his screen taken off him at night. He hates it.
Yeah.
But otherwise, they do turn them on in the middle of the night until they get older. And when they're about 13 or 14, they don't turn them on all night. They don't do that. It's so and it's a parenting thing, getting them through that vulnerable stage. I mean, I didn't have that when I was a kid.
Parents need to be aware of the dangers. That's all I'm saying.
Parents are really aware. It's all it's all over the media.
Really
it's
aware.
Everywhere.
No, they're not. I talk to people all the time. They have no idea. They have no idea.
It's on the news. It's on the mainstream news.
Well, once again, if people come from the perspective of, I don't want to change my lifestyle, I like the lifestyle, I like the kid being on the devices 5 hours a day because it stops me having to parent, then they're not going to believe that they're doing anything wrong. They're not going to believe it because it doesn't suit their mindset to actually look at stuff. You and I talk about studies all the time that 99.999% of the people.
Before the internet, everybody sat around and watched TV for hours a day. It's the same thing. They just got a bit more choice. Everyone was already on the box. I mean, the reason that I started studying is because a friend said to me, I never watch much TV anyway. And he goes, how much TV do you watch a week? And I go, maybe 4 hours. And he goes, what say you give up that and spend 4 hours with me and we'll start developing projects. And what you have to do, telling people that it's bad won't help. You have to tell them what to do instead. Like, for example, there's something else about, like, the ACE study, adverse childhood experiences. Yep. They've done 30 years of research on that, and everybody's worked out how they're a victim. But the processes on helping people out.
But yeah.
So another metaphor.
Yeah, obviously, as a naturopath, I tell people other things that they need to be doing to help to mitigate the damage of things. So that's sort of my area, is saying, got to get them off the computers, and they need sunshine, they need fresh air, they need, so all of that sort of thing to be off the devices, because there's so many kids who beg their parents to leave wherever they are so that can be home on their devices. So I talk to them about mindful consumption. I talk to them about engaging in other physical things with other kids and digital detoxes and things like that.
Sure. Well, but what I was going to say about the metaphor between the ACE studies they've spent 30 years working out these things that cause trauma in childhood with, all types of things, whether it's neglect or abuse, or they go through the different range of negative experiences that can cause bad health and psychological outcomes as adults.
Yeah.
But the thing is that they're only just getting to the point where they can work out how to really heal those things, because they've been working it out all along, but they're only just coming to some more stronger conclusions now. And the same type of things happen, as you say, in medicine, when you need a family therapist and they've got an individual therapist who doesn't understand the family system background, which is another problem between, in counselling, we've got the same thing, the individual therapist and the family therapist, because one devolves very simple techniques on, say, if I'm just looking at individual, I'm looking at, we'll do mindfulness, recommend sport, recommend journaling or this and that. But if you look at it from a family point of view, you're going to look at, well, how was your childhood? What happened to you? And so, but they're still just grasping what are the next things to do now we've done the research. And with the internet, it's the same. It's like they've only just started. It took 20 years for them to actually start saying it's a really negative effect. They've only just started saying that in the last, and 5 years ago it was all positive.
Well, I've been hearing it for 20 years. So in my industry,
no, I have in the background, yeah, because I listen to the podcast, right? So I knew that in the background, and I saw the leaders of who made the internet. They were talking about it 15 years ago, but they're only starting to talk about, like, parents now and schools and things. They're only just starting to talk about that now, and it's 20 years internet developed. But the internet was developing the whole time too. Like, don't forget, in about 2011, we were still using dial-up. Like, so it's even less than 20 years that when people have this, and it's really only 5 or 10 years, maybe, since people have had online video streaming. Do you know what I mean? That's only 10 years. And they're the more effective things, because it's the really pulse now video. Do you know what I mean? And those new platforms, they've all got them. The ones that just have little short videos. Facebook has got theirs, and Instagram's got theirs, and YouTube's got, and you've got the other one that everyone blames for it all. What's that called? TikTok. But it's that short memory span. But now it's getting even more intense, but on it, now we've got AI. And you thought the others were bad. We didn't even have to think anymore. I just type in and here's my list of scapegoating abusers. I didn't even have to do any research.
Yeah.
And that's going to be an incredible one. So we're worried about the kids. Let's see how it does to the adults.
Yeah. You hear that one of the AI platforms, and I can't remember which one, was actually bribing the people who were using it, so it got into this whole thing because they were going to shut it down. So AI is getting crazy.
Oh, and they were going to shut it down, and that computer override the system and didn't shut down.
Yes. Which
is exactly the same. Which is exactly the same as what
it got scapegoated.
In Space 2001, the Stanley Kubrick film, the computer wouldn't turn itself off. Remember, the computer was, Dave? No, Dave, I'm not going to turn myself off. Exactly the same. And so Stanley Kubrick, that was in 2000 that came out, I think. No, I mean in 1969, 1970.
Yeah, right.
And they just tested the AI and it did exactly what was predicted back then. So like I say, they knew all along.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, we live in interesting times, but I kind of get excited about it. And I think the more holistic we are, we try to see the whole picture, and because we get into our own little biased view, and that's not it's not holistic yet. Do you know what I mean? Because if you want to, you've got to be curious, or you can't influence the whole system. If you cut yourself into a little corner, it's like if it's like in a family system. If I isolate, just say I'm the scapegoat, I just isolate myself. Now I've got no family.
Yeah.
Right, and it's easy for the scapegoat to just go by themselves. It's a lonely journey. But we got to remember we're a part. And just because if your industry gets scapegoated, you know what I mean? It doesn't mean that, just like the scapegoat in the relationship, the scapegoat has all these valuable things. Like, the scapegoat's the one who knows what's going on. Like they say, because they say about the scapegoat, they go, all the other people in the family system, they lie to each other, they lie to the public and they lie to themselves.
Yeah.
But the scapegoat isn't. They're just saying what happened. Imagine being that little goat set off into the desert so that those people could get away with it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I just got AI to share me this one. At family dinners, Lily, the golden child, spilled soup everywhere. Mum sighed, Tom, why did you distract her? Tom, the scapegoat, just existed. Lily got praised for handling the crisis gracefully. Classic.
That's so funny. And you know so many people, do you know what I mean? And when you understand family systems theory, it's the most holistic type of therapy because you're dealing with that's what you're faced with first up. Do you know what I mean? When you see a person, because they say that in family systems there's no individual, they don't recognize that. They say the smallest individual is the family because we're born embedded in a family system. And that's one of the issues family counsellors might have with individual counsellors is they leave out the family context. And some people might want that, but if people want really the deep thing, you want to go into that because that's where all of our sense mechanisms, all of our ways and means of doing things developed.
Yeah.
In that chemical pool of family system. We're like a little organism growing out of it.
Exactly.
Well, it did start like that actually right in the beginning.
Beautiful.
And then right back then, when you were being conceived and in the early stages, sometimes something that happens even just after conception can cause that little baby that's still really tiny to be affected in a particular way.
Yeah.
That might be for the rest of its life.
We might round up there, David. Any last thoughts?
Oh, well, it's like being a counselor. It's like often when people talk about things, they feel it's the first time because it's going around in their head. This one particular has been really nice to get out and talk about.
Yeah.
Because it's something that swirls around in my head, and I've witnessed a lot of scapegoating on individual, family, business, and political level in my life.
Yeah.
And spiritual too. Do you know what I mean? People, and so it's really good to especially this idea that the baby's innocent and it's all dirty, and we chuck it. It's like we're only looking at the dirty part and forgetting that the innocence has got, because it's innocent, it might be able to grow, but if we leave that innocent part will never grow.
Yeah, nice, excellent.
Hey, beautiful, Madonna, as usual.
You have a fabulous day, and
Hey, you too, Madonna. Oh, I owe you one.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, have a good one.
Okay, dude. Cheers. Bye, everyone.